Airing first on Asheville FM, this is The Final Straw, a weekly anarchist, anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting from occupied Saligi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from people, projects, and struggles around the world engaging in the long project toward liberation. This week we are presenting audio from a panel conducted last year in Indiana with members of IDOC Watch, which is the Indiana Department of Corrections Watch. From their website, quote, "The IDOC Watch exists to be in solidarity with prisoners. This means we correspond with and foster camaraderie with people who are incarcerated in Indiana, expose abusive conditions and treatment, and fight policies and initiatives that further isolate, marginalize, and harm prisoners. We seek to uplift prisoners' voices and struggles and educate the masses about prisons generally as well as specific issues we are fighting." End quote. This panel features, in order of appearance, Kwame Shakur of the Stolen Lives movement, Sheila, who is a mother, grandmother, and advocate of incarcerated people, Lorenzo Stone-Bey of IDOC Watch and Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, and Zolo Agona Azania, who is formerly of the Black Liberation Army and is a 3-time survivor of death row. He is currently a prolific writer, artist, and advocate for incarcerated people. Many thanks to all the buddies who got this audio out, with a special shout out to Casey.
We're excited to announce that we're airing at 4 p.m. every Sunday on KMSW, the Martinez Street Women's Center radio on 101.5 FM in San Antonio, Texas. You can check them out online at mswomenscenter.org. If you have a local radio that you want to hear us playing on, get in touch with us or check out our radio broadcasting link on our website for ideas of how to propose us.
Before the panel, here are some words from anarchist prisoner Sean Swain.
What you say, what you say, what you say, what? Record like a boss!
I got a lot of feedback from the segment where I gave advice on how to survive isolation. So much so that I intended to revisit that topic and include some further advice that I had left out. But, alas, before I could get to a phone to record it, Donald Trump's approval rating dipped below 35%, and he decided that saving lives from COVID-19 wasn't important anymore. As a consequence, the lockdown is now over, and we are all free to move about freely and get infected and infect our loved ones and die. I actually saw a snippet from an administration official defending this new policy shift, saying that there are, quote, more important things than staying alive, unquote. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all those in charge started living up to that? Well, not living up to that, if you get my drift. So now, in light of the economy being more important than human lives, I have to change gears this week. Instead of more advice on how to survive extended isolation and captivity, I think I'll share some suggestions on how to successfully transition out of extended isolation and captivity. From my experience, it's not as easy as it seems. Consider what you've just experienced as a form of trauma, a slow-cooked kind of trauma. Humans are social animals. We're designed for living in social settings, and we get our sense of identity and purpose from those around us. This sudden social arrest was not healthy, and over time we likely adapted to an unhealthy situation. That is what we do. That's what makes us so damn survivable, is our ability to adapt to new realities. So no doubt we adapted to this one, where we had no direct contact with others, or very limited contact with very few people. No doubt, having technologies like Skype or Zoom probably mitigated our isolation to some degree for many of those who have that. But those technologies likely didn't save us entirely. Likely, you're f***ed up. Maybe in ways you can't quite put your finger on. I remember on several occasions coming out of extended lockdown and feeling like there were too many watts blasting through my speakers. Larger spaces, greater numbers of people. It felt very overwhelming. I had become accustomed to life in a very small, confined space. I had gotten used to existence that was solitary or very sparsely populated. I was no longer hardwired for large spaces or big crowds. I found myself feeling really stressed out when I was out in a cell block in population with 100 moving parts and the whole world happening at once. Does that sound familiar? Don't be surprised if you can't handle social situations for long periods of time. Like I said, you're likely fucked up. So, some suggestions on how to manage that. First, awareness. Be conscious of your own anxiety levels. Don't ignore your own discomfort, or you become something of a powder keg, a ticking time bomb. If you're aware of your anxiety levels, you can respond to them. Some things that I would do, I'd practice deep breathing into the diaphragm, hold it a second or two, and exhale. This gives you lots of oxygen flowing to the brain, and it also releases physical tension in the muscles. Then I'd do some self-talk. I'd assess my situation and talk my way through it. I'm not in danger. There are no robots with laser guns, no samurai chasing me with swords. I'm not hungry or exposed to the elements. I'm not objectively in any different situation than I was 15 minutes ago. So the only thing that has changed is how I feel. And how I feel is not rationally related to how safe my situation really is. When that stopped working for me, I'd find a way to depressurize in my cell in a smaller controlled space. Maybe listen to music, do some writing. The good news is, this anxiety doesn't last forever. Over time, we work our way back into being social creatures again. But in the current reality, if you work at Starbucks and the president has sent you back to work, there's no easing back into the rat race. You might have to practice stress management in a toilet stall in the staff bathroom. That's just how that is. Another symptom of long-term isolation is that you lose the ability to engage others with cue giving and cue taking. What I mean is this. Think about a time you were at the grocery store pushing a cart. Someone comes down the aisle pushing a cart from the other direction. Without speaking, both of you have a certain sense as to which way each of you intends to move. We are able, in subtle ways, to project our intentions to others and to process the signals of others when they project their intentions to us, even with large numbers of people. We're almost magical like that. But I found that after long-term lockdown, my ability to project my intentions clearly and to interpret others' intentions had greatly atrophied. Like any other muscle, those social muscles have weakened through disuse. So if you feel socially awkward like never before, it's probably because you are. We all are. But again, over time, we'll get habituated to social situations again, and we'll stop bumping into each other and swerving into others' lanes of traffic so much. Well, again, if we live that long. Good luck, everybody. This is anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, in exile from Ohio, at Buckingham Correctional in Dillwyn, Virginia. If you're listening, you are the resistance.
You can write to Sean Swain at his latest address at Sean Swain, number 2015638, Buckingham Correctional, P.O. Box 430, Dillwyn, Virginia, 23936. You can find his past writings, recordings of his audio segments, and updates on his case at seanswain.org, or now follow him on Twitter at @SwainRocks.
As a general content warning for this episode, since folks are talking from their direct experiences of the violences of racism and incarceration, this show makes mention of police and prison guard brutality, extreme isolation, and suicide.
Thanks for everybody coming out tonight. My name is Kwame Shakur. I'm a revolutionary, also a part of the Stolen Lives movement in Indiana, IDOC Watch. We're a movement talking about the realities about the prison conditions in Indiana. We also trying to abolish the prison system. Some of the things that we're going to talk about that is going to highlight the nature of prisons, not just in Indiana, but Indiana is a microcosm of the whole nation. This shirt that I have right here Ronald Ronnie Man Johnson, he was killed by the police 5 years ago. Like I said, I'm a part of the Stolen Lives movement. Today I'm wearing this in honor of her son. Her son was killed 5 years ago by the Chicago Police Department. And so we're trying to get justice for that family amongst a lot of other families. Sheila, I met Sheila recently. She's also with the Stolen Lives movement. We had a case up in Gary where a young man named Rashad Cunningham, he was killed by the police August 17, 2019 of this year. The police officer that killed him was Officer Isaiah Price III. He used to work over here in Chicago, and he ended up killing somebody over here. Then he got fired, went over to Gary, doing the same thing he was doing over in Chicago, beating up juvenile. It's like a 14-year-old juvenile. He has a record of beating him up, messing up his insides, filing false claim reports. You know what I mean? Now he ended up killing a young man. So this is how me and Sheila met. And we also are part of, again, IDOC Watch, fighting for justice for the prisoners and trying to abolish the prison industrial complex. We have Lorenzo Stone-Bey. This brother did 37 years in prison. I'm surprised me and him never came across each other because I also did time in prison. I did 18 years in prison over in Indiana, so as well as Zolo. He did 35 plus years on death row. You know, so a lot of us have a lot of accumulated experience, not just something that we read in the book, but we actually lived it. And a lot of us have struggled against the prison industrial complex over here in Indiana. So we have a lot of content that we can share with you so you can understand the day-to-day realities that prisoners face over in all these prisons across the United States. So this brother, Lorenzo Stone-Bey, he's also, again, with IDOC Watch. And because he did so much time in prison, it's a lot that he can contribute to educating and bringing awareness to the public, where it's not just academic thing that we're talking about, it's actual realities. This brother right here, Zolo Agona. This brother right here, when I met him close to 2004, 5, he just got off of death row. He was formerly with the Black Liberation Army, and the Black Liberation Army was the armed struggle for Black liberation during the 60s and 70s and stuff like that. And, you know, just a lot of people heard about the Black Panther Party. Black Panther Party was an above-ground organization that was fighting for our liberation as well, and uniting with other oppressed nationalities that was fighting against the government at that time. The Black Liberation Army, which was separate from the Panther Party, they were the armed struggle. They were the ones actually carrying out armed struggle against the United States government. You had a lot of different groups at that time that was fighting for liberation, and he's a prime example that brings another form of content to this discussion, because he's not only a person that did time, he was a political prisoner. We feel like all people that's incarcerated are political prisoners, no matter if you're conscious of it or you're not conscious of it. But this brother was conscious of what he was fighting for and what he did time for. Did 3 times on death row, fought for his own liberation. When I met this brother, I learned so much from him. He's always been a mentor to me, so I honor him in many different ways. My personal relationship to him and the fact that he's fought for all of our liberation. Not just black people, all of us. You dig what I'm saying? Because we're all fighting against the same enemy. Okay? So we're going to start off with this panel discussion with Sheila. She's going to speak about her involvement with IDOC Watch and her experience.
Okay, hi again. My name is Sheila, and I am a revolutionary in the making, and I am a neophyte to public speaking, so bear with me. I became involved with IDOC Watch because of my son. He has been incarcerated at one of the prisons in Indiana. And I've come to meet a lot of people, and these gentlemen, because of Nick and IDOC Watch, I've come to learn a lot of things regarding the prison industrial complex. Being a mother, a grandmother, a supporter of someone in prison, and not really knowing where it started from, but when you get with the right people, I became aware of how slavery and this whole thing with the prison industrial complex all work together. But today, I want to bring a voice to the voiceless. I talked to a few prisoners, my son included, so this is what he had to say and what he wanted me to bring to the table. He says, "What got me here is a story all by itself. And I won't go into grave detail about what brought me into the prison. But I will mention that I was denied due process that is supposed to be afforded to me by the United States Constitution. What was I denied? It says, the Constitution says that I have a right to be confronted by my accuser. And I was denied that. I was denied effective legal counsel, the right to jury polling, and the right to be tried by a jury of my peers. Said, hell, I was even convicted of a non-law. And I paid several ransoms trying to get out of this prison. However, since my incarceration, I never thought in a million years that I would be subjected to such inhumane treatment. I didn't think that anyone could be forced to live in such deplorable conditions. I would hear prisoners screaming all night long, seeking medical attention, crying out and screaming out for medical attention that fell on deaf ears of the correctional overseers. Just today, a prisoner died. He begged and screamed for attention, and no one came to see about him. Unfortunately, he came to an untimely death. He goes on to talk about the food that's provided by Aramark, who is also a benefactor of the prison industrial complex. The deplorable food, the quality of the food, the portions, and that the labeling on the food, the marking says not fit for human consumption, for prisoners and zoo animals only. He goes on to say that in order to eat anything that resembles nutrition, you have to buy it from the commissary that is priced 5 times the cost of local groceries. The prison is infested with bed bugs, rodents, and extremely unsanitary conditions that can cause anyone to go insane. There's so many people dying in this place every month. It's unbelievable. IDOC claims of rehabilitation is actually debilitating and repressive. Another prisoner states, and he's in Indiana, but a different prison, because of the expensive cost of communication, a lot of time the brothers and sisters feel unloved, forgotten, unforgiven, and unwanted. Prisoners, having to talk to someone or to listen to them is game-changing. However, mail comes up missing, and sometimes mail is better than money. He goes on to say that the guards sometimes lose the mail as punishment to keep the inmates or the prisoner in control or check. He said, I was 18 years old when I was captured. I'm not blaming anyone, but I'm still a human being. Now I'm 33 years old, another prisoner, 15 when he went in. And he says, for a period of 18 months, during that time, guards treated me and other juveniles worse than dogs. The officers, and I put overseers, would use unnecessary force just for sport, then tell us that if we did not want to be treated this way, then we never should have came to the prison. The overseers would put their knees on my neck, then tell me to move, knowing that I could not move. One time I was taken down, then a guard sprayed pepper spray into my mouth. And at that time, he said he lost consciousness and eventually had to be taken to the hospital outside of the prison. He says, I am a foster child, so I had no one to seek legal action against that behavior. I was told numerous times not to fight back against another offender, that I should ball up. When I did that, I still got sent to the hole. I did not understand what to do. I was a mental and emotional wreck. I had made a few suicide attempts. Guards used their pens as weapons against us. They made false reports that landed us in the hole or other disciplinary action. I'm out now. Although at one time I thought I would never survive what I went through, I still have nightmares. I do not wish this on my worst enemy. As for me, a parent, a friend and supporter of the guys on the inside, it has been horrific. As a parent, when your son gets to a point of like a breaking point and all he can do is cry, like a lot of these people that come out of prison, some of them, they tell you the stories, but they won't tell you about the times that they cried. They won't tell you about the times that they were at a point of just not want to exist anymore. As a parent, to hear your child, when he's at that point, and you hear all the time about people on the inside committing suicide because of the inhumane treatment, that's heartbreaking because you can't do anything about it, which is why now I'm working with IDOC Watch, because I feel that that's the only way I can do anything, not just to save my child, but others. And it's terrible. I have sleepless nights. It seems like that I'm there with my son in that darkness, in that hole with him, but I can't help him. Again, I'm so happy that I came to meet everybody on this panel with Nick. It helps me to understand a little better what's going on, why it's happening. I understand now that the prison industrial complex is the method of maintaining and expanding and refining slavery, this new age slavery, free labor. After all, isn't that what made America great? Free labor. Abraham Lincoln understood capitalism when he stated in his letter to Horace Greeley that if I could save the Union without freeing the slaves, I would have done that. Capitalism and racism seem to support each other. This explains why blacks, who make up only 16% of the United States population, is remarkably 30% of prison population. The prison industrial complex has introduced the resurgence of chattel slavery with a twist. Prisoners are the new cotton. Karl Marx said 100 years ago that the capitalist can make anything a commodity. Thank you.
This is the Final Straw radio show. We are hearing a panel recorded last year featuring members of IDOC Watch, which witnesses and amplifies injustices done to prisoners in Indiana. We just heard Sheila speaking about her son's experience with incarceration and the ties between the prison industrial complex and slavery. Now we will hear words from Lorenzo Stone-Bey of IDOC Watch and Jailhouse Lawyers Speak.
It's an honor for me to be here. I really don't know where to start at, but to give a brief history. My name is Lorenzo Stone-Bey. I and 4 others were sentenced to life sentence in 1976 at the age of 17 for a political case that allowed us, well, one of them passed, one went in the witness protection program, and 3 of us eventually made it back home to our loved ones. Fortunately, when I went at 17, I had a great honor of meeting my mentor, my brother, and my friend. And what I mean by that, a lot of juveniles going into prison systems now, they don't have the education or the tools to know what they're dealing with in their dehumanizing process. And the result of me reading material like this, I started studying myself, whether I was going to succumb to the dehumanization or resurrect myself from the ashes. When they cast me to the side and told me I was nobody, that I wasn't going nowhere. I then became politically involved in the prison struggles. the riots, the takeovers, the guard stabbing, working to bring gang troops together. So after 23 years, I was released on parole with a life sentence. I'm still on that life sentence parole. In 2006, my parole was violated for a Class C misdemeanor, a DWI, driving without a license. As a result of that, they held me another 12 years. In April 2017, my stepson, William Space, was killed by the Portage Police Department. And due to my own political conscience and my own political activities, I started organizing outside support for my family and for him, because he was more than a stepson. He was my son. I raised him. I had met Black Lives Matter because they got involved. They reached out to me while I was in prison and came to my family support. When I made parole, he got killed in May 22nd of 2017. I made parole May 17th of 2017. I was invited to a protest by Black Lives Matter Indiana chapter. And we was in front of the prison protesting. And there since then, I've been trying to give voices to guys that's going into prisons. You will hear a lot of talk about different aspects and different levels of the incarceration that's going on in this country. I grew up without my father. I'm 62 years old now. I've never seen him a day in my life. I still have nightmares. Parole officers still come to my house and look under my bed. So I'm still subjected to some of the things that they are talking about. Do not only hurt us psychologically, it hurt us health-wise. Right now, I'm suffering from COPD with a lung infection that they should have caught before I was released, but they didn't. Now, that's a taxpayer burden. Now, it's my burden that I have to deal with. There's so many of us are coming out in prison that don't have support that they should have, or re-entry programs that they should have. And again, that's when I started working with my brother Zolo. It's a group of guys like me and him that's coming out of prison, trying to get together to give a voice and help those that's coming out, so they won't have to go through some of the struggles and the hardships that we go through. I've been home almost two years, and I just finally got my own place. God blessed me with that. But I didn't give up. If I could commend or recommend anything for anybody that's hearing my voice, it would be to reach back inside them prison walls into these juvenile facilities. Because not only do they suffer from lack of outside support, some people don't even have families they can call. Some of them don't even get letters or visits. So the mind frame they put them in, it makes them become hopeless and helpless. And when they return back to the society with nowhere to stay and nowhere to go, it compounds their struggle. And this is what a lot of us in society is forgetting, that them is our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our sons, our grandkids that's being destroyed by this system that we got to deal with and they are not. We got to start having our political leaders accountable. The DOCs across the country, we got to hold accountable. Whether it's writing a letter, whether it's making phone calls, whether it's making a visit, or just sending a card. Because as her son said, one of the guys said in that letter, sometimes a card is better than money. Because they feel love, they know somebody cares. We don't receive that in prison. So once again, I thank y'all, and Brother Zolo.
My name is Zolo Agona Azania. I spent over 35 and a half years throughout Indiana prison system. More than 27 years and 3 months I spent on death row. I was given the death sentence twice, so I was placed on death row twice on the same case. Case got overturned, I had another trial, death penalty again. And the third time I got the case overturned, I was fortunate. I received help from the People's Law Office in Chicago on Milwaukee Avenue. And I ended up becoming real good friends with Michael Deutsch, who was the chief counsel at the People's Law Office. He represented me and his wife, Erica Thompson, and their friend, Nanasi, and Jesse Cook from Indianapolis. And they snatched me from death row, and with the support of people like you and others who gave me support and who was on the picket lines protesting. As a result, and by the grace of God, here I am. Well, while I was on the inside, I'm going back to 1972. I came up in the streets, single parent home. My father passed away when I was an early age. Being that I was a boy, and at that time, a lot of pressure was put on the boys. And they're called the man of the house, for example. I didn't have a clue what a man was. I just saw what my father had done and what was going on in the streets. So without that guidance, I just used my own infantile way of thinking and just did what I thought was best. So I made a whole lot of mistakes within my family as well as in the streets. I ended up catching a home invasion case in which a person was killed in their home. I was 18 years old. I went to prison with a reduced sentence of voluntary manslaughter. I did 7.5 years. The prison at that time was different than what it is today. The prison at that time, the average age was 30 years old. So when I came in at the age of 19, I was considered a youngster. So people who didn't know my name, we called each other by family relations, like cuz, bruh, blood, things like that. So while I was in there, I'm insecure. In the back of my head, I'm thinking about, the stories I've been hearing about rapes and things of that nature. That was going on. So, but the young people at that time had it real hard. I think they had it harder at the time I came through when I was younger than it is today. Back then, you didn't have gangs as they are what they call today in the prison system. You didn't have that. You had what people would call homies or hometown friends and things of that nature who would band together from the different hometowns where they was from, the different locations. I did the same thing, but I was able to stand on my own 2 feet when I was to watch other people in the prison. I would watch the ones who was by themselves. I'm like, how can he walk by himself? Ain't he scared? Is he worried about somebody going to do something to him? I couldn't figure it out, because we think in terms of game. Game or having an edge or an angle on something. Everything got to have an ulterior motive. So I'm trying to figure out, how are they able to walk by themselves? They must know some game. So I would go to the drill ground or the rec yard, and I would sit on the bench, and maybe a group of older men, they would be sitting down. So I would scoot, and I would continue to scoot down until I get a little closer in earshot, and I would just sit there until they noticed me. Sometimes they would just tell me to go hit on somewhere, get away from them, and other times they would invite me in or just talk in front of me. Well, there was a couple of people who was members of the Black Panther Party in the Indianapolis chapter. They had one of the best chapters that was organized in the United States. So McCowhoo and M. Martha, they took a liking to me and brought me in. And they used to feed me books and things. I would go to the cell. I wasn't really a reader. I was a picture reader. If the book didn't have any pictures in it, I'd thumb to the pages. I'm like, man, I throw it to the side. Really, I actually couldn't read. I was a functionally illiterate. But I ended up getting into a fight and coming to the rescue of a friend. I caught a battery case on a guard, and aggravated battery, and I was taken to outside court, given another charge. But while I was on lockup, that's when I actually began to start to read. And I actually began to start wearing my glasses too. I've been wearing glasses for a long time, but I always find an excuse to lose them or conveniently break them. So I got tired of being called Mr. Peabody and Four Eyes and stuff like that. But by trying to read, I used to get these terrible headaches. And at the time, you didn't have recreation like you hear about on TV, different programs coming out on recreation and being able to walk around and socialize. You didn't do that. When you went to lockup, they still had the hole, and you step on the floor, they strip you butt naked, and you had a hole in the floor. And some cells, if you was fortunate enough, you had a toilet in there, and they would have you in all darkness. You turn the lights out, and you were sealed in. They don't do that anymore. They put you in, this is the opposite. They put you in a room where the lights stay on 24/7 and the walls are white and you get snowblind over a period of time. That's how they do it now. But back then, they still put you, that's where the term hole come from, like he was buried in a hole. Well, I began to read and study. I began to change my way of thinking and analyzing. But I would analyze my situation. And by being in prison, I was able to make a connection to what was happening in prison and what's happening on this world scene as far as politics are concerned. And you had a lot of political activity going on in prison at that time based upon the black prison rights movement in California that was led by George Jackson and the Soul Dad brothers. And then on the heels of what happened in Attica in 1971. So there was a wave coming from the west and from the east coast of the United States, and it was spread out all throughout the country, throughout the prison system. You had people that was involved in the movement as far as the civil rights movement, led by Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and various other groups, as well as the Black Panther parties and the Republic of New Africa and other groups. People was going to jail. And by those people coming to jail, you had an influx of people who had experience in the struggle out on the streets. And those of us that was in prison who was not exposed to that out on the streets at the time prior to our incarceration, we became and formed study groups. So you had study groups all over the prison. And the study group that I was in, I met people from different places in different regions of the country who was arrested and convicted within Indiana. Some I met from Chicago, some was from St. Louis, California, Washington, D.C., Mississippi, all over. So we was able to break the isolation that we was in our different regions of the country. So we were sharing knowledge and experiences of the struggle. So this is how I began to be re-educated. And being re-educated, in the process of my re-education, I remember how hard it was for me to read and how hard it was for me to comprehend a lot of this literature that we take for granted nowadays. So when I started to write, I kept in mind my way of thinking. So I write for young people. Also, once I was able to make parole, I put my politics in practice. As Karl Marx said, it was a VLN, I don't remember who said it, but it's been echoed many times throughout the years that theory is tested through practice. We test our theory through practice to know what is true and what is not, and what is doable and what is not. So when I got out of prison, the things I was reading in the books, I actually was doing those things. Even though I made mistakes along the way, it helped me, and I had a focus and a direction. I had a foundation. So while I was in prison, I joined the underground from in prison in 1976. In 1976, we had a philosophy of turn the prisons into training grounds. So at the prisons, the whole prison system, unlike it is today, but at that time, in the early to late 70s, the whole prison system was turned into schools. So one of our sayings was, where you learn that at? School of Hard Knocks. You know, what university you go to? I went to the University of the School of Hard Knocks. And that meant that we got our study and our education from prison. It was an informal education that we did to help ourselves. A lot of these pamphlets and booklets and things that you see up here, I wrote those over the years when I was in prison. I had like an old manual typewriter in a cell. So I'll write little small essays about things that happened. Then I would explain the situation from either I was on death row or when I was on disciplinary segregation. So I would analyze what was going on. I said, this is what's happening. So I began to win over the prisoners trust. And people had begun to follow me without me actually knowing. I was actually speaking to my peer group as far as the study groups, but the literature was getting around and it was being copied from cell to cell by hand by other prisoners. I found this out later. And this is how I was able to reach a lot of people, not being there. But when I was physically there, I would spend time with young people. But I would do it in a way where I'm following them. In other words, they tell me what to do, then I do it. In other words, they tell me what the problem is and what they need, then I would know how to articulate it. I would know how to write letters for them. I would know how to file things into court. I became an advocate within the prison. So I did these for a lot of people, and I took the cases free. And at the same time, I was honing my skills, preparing for what I had to do when I hit the streets.
This is the Final Straw Radio Show, and I'm William Goodenough. We are hearing Zolo Agona speak about how he approached organizing and education in prison. Now he will speak about the circumstances that sent him to prison at the beginning.
It takes money to fight. And I did not believe in picket signs. I did not believe in walking on the picket line. I did not believe in nonviolence. I believe in being nonviolent to the extent of being nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with me. But I was not willing to turn the other cheek or be nonviolent with anybody who was violent with me. So that was the position that El Haj Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, that was his position. But my main influence came from George Jackson and Jonathan Jackson. And that is who became our symbol. Jonathan became the symbol of the Black Liberation Army. So whenever you see that, that is the symbol. That's what that stands for. The Panther was the symbol of the Black Panther Party. And these two groups received a lot of international attention as well. And they became famous or infamous depending upon what position you hold. So I was part of that group, and for years I would never talk about it. And when I was on death row, I never even discussed it with anyone except certain people who was in the know. And those who know ain't saying. I put it like that. But it's only up to now that things begin to slowly come out because the people is susceptible to it. And also, during that period of time, a lot of mistakes was made because in order to go underground, you must have above ground apparatus or political organization in place, even though there's a separation, because that organization is the ones who educate the people about what's going on, and they explain the actions, because our actions were mixed up with criminal activity. And it was hard to determine what was revolutionary and what was criminal. So it became so blurred, everything was criminal. So those of us that was involved in the underground couldn't come out and say, oh, no, wait a minute, oh, that's not how they go. That's what this was about. You know, it couldn't have been done like that way. Things wasn't explained. So we became isolated, didn't have any support. It's like going scuba diving 20,000 leagues under the sea, but you don't have any oxygen. You have to depend upon the tube that's coming down to you, and air pumped to you while you down there underground. So when we got cut off from that support, people was running for their lives and everybody for themselves. Some was trying to make it to the top. Some drowned. Some just disappeared. Some lost their mind. Some still to this day suffer from post-traumatic stress as any other veteran of the movement or the struggle or the war. And this is what I come through. And I'm talking more now than I ever did since beginning of that time. I haven't been talking to anybody about that. But just twice that I began to open up briefly about some of those things. But I want to touch on something else before I turn the panel back over to the brother. And that is, old people don't make revolution. It's the young people who is the ones bring about change, or to a qualitative change. We were all in our 20s and teens. Nowadays, if you look at the teenagers and those in their early 20s, you scratch your head trying to figure out what happened. You know, the maturity level has gone down. The information is going up, but the information is an information overload. There's so much information coming at people and so fast that it's hard for them to grasp it and know what's what. Because it's changing. When you think you know something and got the answer, then here comes something else at you. So, oh no, we're not, it's been upgraded. We don't go by that anymore. It's this now. So people is off balance, and they don't know which way is what, you see, and that's what the confusion is now. But what I do is I learn from the young people on what to do, and then I coach them. I never had time to grow old, and there's never been a separation between me and the youth, because I was isolated for so long. I was in prison for so long that I saw the prison turn all the way over. That's a term that we use, that everything changed. So what used to be, when I first started doing time in the early 70s, no longer exists. When the average age was 30 years old, the average age now is 14 to 26 maybe. And 26 is kind of old. That's the population now. So when it used to be when the older prisoners would kind of like give the younger prisoners guidance, they don't have that anymore. There's so many young people in prison now, they don't have to worry about being raped. They don't have to, that's a good thing. But they don't have to worry about the things that we had to go through when I was coming through, when it was different. Now the problem with young people in prison is killing each other. That's the biggest problem. And it's the colonial criminal mentality that's holds sway, that was promoted through the drug trade. And I'm gonna stop right there for now, and then come back. I can go off on a tangent, and then next thing I know, time be up. So if we get back around to me, maybe I can touch on a few other things.
Yeah. If you have any questions, as you already know, I'm Kwame Shakur. Like I said, I'm a revolutionary, but not by choice, really. It's like by accident in a lot of ways, you know what I mean? I caught a case when I was 19 years old. I'm from Indianapolis. Just like a lot of young black kids I don't never blame my parents for how I ended up or how I end up going to prison, because to me, I feel like society had failed a lot of our parents. Like, they were not educated. They didn't know a lot of different things to help them prepare us. You know why? Because they killed off a lot of our leaders in the 60s and 70s. They locked up a lot of our leaders in the 60s and 70s. I didn't know that at the time. I was just like a lot of the black kids out here that wants to be a basketball player, football player, and then when that don't turn out, then I'm in the streets. You dig what I'm saying? I never dreamed about being out here, you know, committing robberies and car thefts and carjackings and burglaries and stuff like that. But those are the other crowd of individuals I started to look up to after I realized my hoop dreams was about to go down the drain and stuff. So I started looking at the dudes on the streets that all got recognition. Like, all the women liked them. They had all the money. They had the cars. They could fight. You dig what I'm saying? They had the social clout, the social capital within our communities, which is a form of the American dream from the underside, the black illegitimate capitalism. And this is what the system allows a lot of us in order to keep us entrapped within the clause of this system. But I was very impressed by that lifestyle and stuff. So I started getting down the street. I was already an angry person. You know what I mean? Like, I was bitter. I always felt like I was suicidal, but you wouldn't know that. You know, like, since I've been out 3.5 years now. I did 18 years in prison. So on my side of town, some of these young dudes or some that's right under me, they look up to me, but I try to tell them off the top, like, don't look up to that right there, because that came from a bad place. That came from me really hating life. So when you hate life, you can do anything. That's the most dangerous person. So, you know, I ended up catching a bank robbery. Got in a shootout with the police and everything, because to me, I always felt like this. If you in this lifestyle, whatever lifestyle, to me, you all in or nothing. So to me, anybody can get it. I felt like, you know, Tupac, he represented a lot to me. He was many things. He was contradictory. He was conscious, but he was also had his contradictions. And he spoke to me in a lot of different levels. He actually helped me to get consciousness eventually. But I was like, the song Me Against the World, that's how I felt. It was only me and my clique, and that's the only thing I cared about. So anybody else could get it, police, citizens. But we had a little bit of morals than this these generation out here now. Like, they don't care about nothing. I call this the crack generation growing up. You dig what I'm saying? Where everything renegade, everything lawlessness. You dig what I'm saying? At least with us, like, we wouldn't rob old people, we wouldn't rob children, we wouldn't rob homeless people and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I wouldn't even sell drugs back then. I didn't even believe in that. That's one reason why I justified it in my mind, like, okay, well, I ain't selling drugs, but I'm robbing the drug dealers. You dig what I'm saying? I'm robbing the people in their circle and stuff. You dig what I'm saying? So I justified it in my mind. Well, I'm doing good. But then when I realized, when I caught that bank robbery case, I was becoming more, I think the more you in that lifestyle, you become a wolf to survive. You become numb to your environment. You become numb to everything. And in time, you start to evolve into things that you never thought you was going to become. Like, if I would have got away with that bank robbery, my dream was to become a drug dealer. You know what I mean? And all my dudes that I was in boys' school with, I was going to put them on. And that I was going to be the shot caller. And here, you sell these dope, you sell this. Because I saw in boys' school, they was trustworthy. That was my training ground, boys' school. I learned how to organize in boys' school. You know what I mean? I saw how the gangs was really disorganized. You dig what I'm saying? But if you have a strong group, a solid core, small group, and you put quality over quantity, you can control a whole cottage. And that's what I learned how to do in boys' school. We formed a group in there, and we was the dominant little group. And where the gangs and stuff was disorganized, and because of our small numbers, we could push our weight around. You dig what I'm saying? So I started learning in boys' school how to become a better criminal. I remember in boys' school, they told us 2 out of 3 people that goes to boys' school gonna end up in prison. And they said 3 out of 4 that go to boot camp is gonna end up in prison. And at that time, we all looked around each other. We was like, I guess I'm the one that ain't going. I was sorry for y'all. But when I ended up getting out and they caught this case, all them dudes that was in boys' school with me, I knew all of them. They was all in the county jail, robberies, murders. You dig what I'm saying? It just prepared us for prison. So when I ended up going to prison and stuff, I came in there. You got to take in consideration, I always was intelligent to know that education could get you somewhere, but I didn't understand the fullness of education. I saw education as how this society teaches us what education is. It's to get a good career, you know what I mean, to make a living, to be able to support your family. So I always understood education was important. So I learned how to beat the system and get good grades. You know, I used to cram before a class and then go in there and get an A or a B, you know what I mean? But then ask me 2 weeks later, I'll probably be like, I don't know none of this stuff I heard, but I know how to beat the system. That's why when I hear people talk about their A's and B's, that don't mean nothing to me because I learned how to beat the system. So I don't know if you beating the system or not. And I also realized that the education I gave myself in prison was qualitatively greater than the education that they gave me. You know, Carter G. Woodson said that we all given 2 educations, one that we're given and one that we give ourselves. I'm paraphrasing him. Of the 2, the latter is the best. The one I gave myself was way better than the education these school systems gave me. You dig what I'm saying? But it took me a process to get there because I was like a lot of people. I didn't see education nothing but to get a good job or career. It was not about making myself whole. It was not about understanding life. It was not helping me to understand my relationship between people, between humanity, between understanding our culture, understanding history, and seeing my place within history and where we supposed to be fighting for today. You dig what I'm saying? I didn't see that at that time. When I first came down, it's remind me of Mao Zedong. He said sometimes the uneducated can lead the educated. That's what happened to me. One of my best friends was very uneducated. He taught himself how to read in the county jail. And one day he's coming from the library. I'm on the rec yard down in Wabash Valley Correction Facility. I see him walk out. He got some book in his hand, and I'm looking at him. I'm like, man, what the heck are you on, dude? Like, you about to get institutionalized. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't understand that at all. My concept is, like, you got to come in prison. You got to be hard. You know what I mean? We got to prepare for war because it might go down at any minute, so we got to work out, get big. You dig what I'm saying? We the youngsters in here. We only 19, 20 and stuff like this. So a lot of these dudes in here, they been down a long time, big, cut up and stuff like this. But we wasn't going to come in there and be like pushed around and stuff. You dig what I'm saying? So that was my focus. Like, we got to prepare for war at any time. You know what I mean? So that's why I was dumbfounded when he came out here with a book. And I asked him, I was like, what's all that stuff about? And he was like, man, I'm trying to learn, trying to educate myself. That's when I learned that he was illiterate, and he taught himself how to read and write. But he used to give me books. Well, he tried to give me books and stuff. I wasn't trying to hear none of that. Like I said, my mentality was very, very myopic, you know what I mean, to say the least. And he first gave me this one conscious book, and I remember telling him, I was like, bro, I'm not with that black power stuff. I'm not with that institutionalized stuff. Like, I don't know what you on, bro. So he saw my level of mentality. He gave me hood books to read because he realized he needed to spark an interest in reading. You dig what I'm saying? So once he sparked that interest in reading, because I could read, but I couldn't comprehend that well. Even though I got good grades, again, I told you I learned how to beat the system. You dig what I'm saying? I really didn't internalize a lot of the stuff that I was taking in. I knew how to get good grades. That's what I was good at. You know what I mean? So my mom, the juvenile system, they used to give me breaks and stuff because of that. You know what I mean? But long story short, after I used to read some of the little hood books, he gave me Iceberg Slim. I came back to him. I was like, man, give me another book. He gave me Iceberg Slim. That's when I realized I don't like pimps. I used to think pimps was cool and stuff. You dig what I'm saying? Till I realized what it really is. It's very predatorial. It's very inhumane. Then he gave me another book. And this time it was a conscious book again. And I was like, bro, I told you I ain't with that black power stuff, like Nation of Islam stuff. Like, what are you on, bro? He was like, you liked all the other stuff that I gave you to read. Why don't you check out this right here? And if you don't like it after that, I'm through with it. You do what I'm saying? And you keep on doing whatever you got to do. So my first book I read was Visions of a Black Man by Naeem Akbar. And my mentality was that you can never understand me if you never lived in my shoes. That was my mentality at that time in my life. This first book I started to read, I realized, like, dang, this dude is talking about me. And I actually understand exactly what he's saying, because I'm looking around in here, and all these dudes in here is not men. They boys. They thinking with their genitalia. They thinking because I can fight, I'm a man. Or because I stab you, I'm a man. Or because when I was on the street, I had a lot of money that made me a man. Or because I messed with all these females made me a man. That's what we was taught. That's what I came up thinking real manhood was about. But then I started to read this book and started redefining manhood. So this is the first time in my life I started looking back and like, dang, it's a lot of stuff I thought I knew, but I didn't know. So me and a friend of mine jumped the police, beat up one of the police in prison. First 3 months I was in prison, they killed this brother named Theodore McKenzie, May 27th, 1999. He was my first Mike Brown, not Mike Brown right here. Mike Brown is actually a friend of mine. The Ferguson situation, I just came from his birthday party a little bit ago, but the very first Mike Brown was in prison. That's when I started to become a little bit more conscious, like, dang, I thought I was gonna come in here and beef with all these prisoners, but I see the main enemy is gonna be this prison administration, because they can kill us and get away with it. So me and him jumped a officer that was on some real racist, repressive stuff, and me at that time in my life, I was like, just like on the streets, nobody's gonna tell me nothing. Like, I got forever in time, they gave me 39 years. You go home every day, so I'm not gonna allow you come in here and disrespect my humanity. You dig what I'm saying? So to me, I always looked at violence as a good way to exercise my power back on another individual. So at that time, I ended up beating up this police officer with a friend of mine, and on lockup unit Supermax is when I found myself. My first book, he said George Jackson was his. Mine was Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton really shaped my way of looking at life. He was the first guru. He was 21 years old. I was 21 years old when I was on that lockup unit when I read the Vita Wawa 2 for the first time. And I listened to this man speak and stuff, and I was like, damn, man, I want to be like him when I grow up. I was the same age as him, but I knew I needed a lot of growth. He represented a level of consciousness that I lacked. That's when I started my search for self on these lockup units. During this time in prison is when I started mixing my politics, because like Zolo said, when I read Mao Zedong, he talked about if you want to create revolution, you start with revolution right now. You practice revolution. You dig what I'm saying? You merge theory with practice. So that became my way of looking at things. Sun Tzu was also an initial influence on me. In The Art of War, he said, know yourself and know the enemy you will be prepared in 100 engagements. He said, if you know yourself and you don't know the opposition, you'll win some, you'll lose some. If you don't know yourself and you don't know the opposition, you will invariably lose every engagement. That became my philosophy. I actually got something like that tatted on me. So whenever I started to study, I also read the other side of the equation. Before I read Karl Marx, I read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. I wanted to understand capitalism. He was the first one to teach me about slavery and that capitalism was going to eventually overthrow slavery. That's what the Civil War was really about. It had nothing to do with black people, freeing black people. All this Abraham Lincoln, he was a white supremacist. But also, while I'm reading, I'm also trying to organize people, and we're struggling and fighting back. This when I realized that fighting back is not only a way to move forward and fight for justice for the people, in this situation, the prison population, but it's also a very strong fortifying thing for your humanity and your personality. A lot of people, when I get out now and I tell them how long I did in prison, they be like, what? You don't look like it. That's because I was able to preserve my mind through struggle, through resistance. You dig what I'm saying? The whole time I was in prison, I resisted. That's why I did like over 10 years on Supermax and still resisted on Supermax. It got to the point where counterintuitively, when the guards come on the unit and they was on some BS, I had no problem be like, well, okay, well, we're gonna lock this down. And if y'all wanna take us to lockup, come on. Because at the end of the day, your lockup is not gonna destroy me. You dig what I'm saying? I'm not saying that the lockup don't affect you because it affects everybody. I don't care how strong you are. Like I used to come off a lockup and used to stutter and my personality, I hear my voice come out my mouth, but it don't sound like me. It took 6 months to 9 months every time I got off a lockup to really get my sense of self back. But through struggle, it preserved my humanity. It preserved who I was, whereas now some of my friends, they lost their minds. I saw some of them lose their minds in prison. And one of them, he's supposed to get out real soon, but I saw it with my own eyes. Like in prison, a lot of people commit suicide. It's a lot of suicides that happen in there because they want to break you. You know what I'm saying? And some of them are broken because they don't resist. That's why a lot of people out here in the population are broken because we don't resist. We just accept what this society do to us. When they kill people like this, some of us just allow this to go unheard. And we're not in the streets. We're not fighting for our loved ones. But when you resist, you find a sense of determination and perseverance like no other. Like I have a sense of fearlessness because of the resistance all those years in prison. All of y'all here, I'm glad that all of y'all came out. But every last one of y'all, look at this as a time, not just an informative session to learn about prisons and stuff like that, but look at this as a time to ask yourself, what are you going to do with your life? Because Franz Fanon said, every generation out of relative obscurity must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it. What are you going to do? If you lived in the Civil War era, would have fought? Would you stood up for the slaves? Or would you sit back and allow slavery to go on? If you lived in the 60s, when you saw the civil rights movement and the black liberation movement going on, would you stayed on the sideline or would you participate? Well, we're in that time in history right now. The resurgence of a lot of people waking up, fighting for justice, for Mike Brown, for Ronnie Man Johnson, for Alton Sterling, for Justice Hale, for Sandra Bland, for Eric Gardner, for all these people that's been killed by the police and steadily hunting us down. What are we going to do? Are we going to stand up or are we just going to allow this to keep on going? Or like my guy that's in prison for something he ain't do, Leon Benson, free Leon Benson, for 21 years for something Indiana know he ain't do. Not just Leon Benson, Royal Amos, another friend of mine, in prison, been in there 13 years for something he ain't do. Somebody killed his woman and his kid that she was carrying. But he's in there doing that time. He's doubled twice sentenced. You know what I mean? Imagine that. When somebody kill your family member and you're doing the time for somebody else killing them. Or Vernon Bateman that's been in there for about 20-some years for something he ain't do, a rape. And they know he ain't do it because the person that he supposed to rape went and told him she lied. But he's still in there. Or Anthony Walker. in there for murder for something he ain't do. Still in there. It's a lot of us in there, man, that ain't in there for something we did do. I did what I did. I take responsibility. You dig what I'm saying? But I don't take responsibility when my hand was up in the air and they kept on shooting me. I don't take no responsibility for that. But that's all.
That was a panel discussion between 4 members of Indiana's IDOC Watch. For more about this group and how to support and get involved, you can go to their website, idocwatch.org. Stay tuned midweek to our podcast feed for the extended Q&A session which occurred after this panel. It will also be up at our website, thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org.